Now I'd like to give a brief outline for the seminars after we've all introduced ourselves. So, as hopefully all of you know, it's going to be a 3-week seminar. I heard from many of you that you haven't had as much experience in debate, but that's okay because our goal is to give a brief introduction to all types of speech and debate. And third week will be really cool because we'll hopefully be able to do actual mock speech and debate events. We'll give you a specific topic, and hopefully you'll be able to use the skills that you learned from the first 2 weeks and actually be able to give real speeches and debates. There are 3 things I want to emphasize throughout the entire seminar. The first being that I'll be asking a lot of questions, and so will Kiona when she does speech for the second week. And you don't have to raise your hand for these questions. I really just want you to yell out any answers you have, anything you're curious about, or anything you think about the answer in general. But if you do have a question about things outside the question itself, feel free to raise your hand. We really want this to be interactive, and I really want you to also have really interesting questions about any of the things we talk about today. The second thing is about, hopefully that this will be a really interactive seminar, that I hopefully don't just want to keep talking for an hour and a half, and I really want all of you to engage and be really curious and be willing to talk with me as well. The third and most important thing is that I really hope that all of you have fun. That debate, the reason why I've stayed with it for 7 years is that it's become the most passionate experience of my life. It's radically changed how I talk, how I speak, and what I've learned. And I hope that all of you may be able to find that passion, even if it's not debate in general. So let's begin with the seminar itself, and this is the big question that I want to start with. Does anyone know what public speaking is? What speaking or public speaking is in general?
Like speaking in front of people.
Yes, exactly. It's all about communication between 2 different groups of people. But does anyone know, interesting, why we do public speaking? Why is this such an important skill for the future and also for right now? Does anyone have any guesses? You can just yell out the answer if you're curious. It doesn't have to be, it can be anything. Johanna?
So you can convey messages or ideas to other people?
Yes, exactly. And that's the big thing I want to talk about and why public speaking is such an important activity. And that's the 2 things that were mentioned through the answers, which is that first is that public speaking is a face-to-face interaction between 2 groups of people. Especially now when all of us are on our phones, on our iPads, on our screens. Nathan and Shannon and I was talking to them about Google Hangouts and how all of us are so addicted to texting and typing through group chats. But the problem is that we don't really actually gain a lot of communication skills through them. We're still scared to talk to people face to face, even though we're so excited to talk to people like on our phones through text messages. And the goal of public speaking as a communication activity is to convince people. It's a persuasion. And that what's really important is that, especially since we want to talk with other people, public speaking, in fact, is mainly emphasis on how we're able to get people interested in a certain idea. And that means that there are many different ways that we do public speaking. For example, Ken will be talking about it next week, which is about speech, and which is like right here from Google itself. Speech is used to inform, persuade, or entertain an audience. But the goal of this week will be about debate, and I'll talk about how debate serves as a really interesting form of public speaking. So, now that we know what public speaking is in general, does anyone know why we're scared of public speaking? I'll give 2 general terms that are really important to give us an introduction to why everyone's so scared and why it's so important to learn about it. First is the term called glossophobia. So if anyone knows what phobia means, that is a scientific term for things that we're scared of. And glossophobia is the large term in general of our fear of public speaking. I'll go into the reasons why we're scared and how it ranks among the other common fears like spiders or clowns. But the thing that is really interesting about public speaking is that there's a common phrase known as the fight, flight, and freeze response. Has anyone heard about what the fight or flight response is? Hello? Does anyone know what, can anyone give me an example of what the fight or flight response is? Johanna?
When we perceive a threat as humans, we either have a response to fight, which gives us an extra surge of adrenaline, or to flight, or to run away from the threat.
Exactly. But has anyone ever seen someone run away from the stage or try to fight the audience when we're doing public speaking? Has anyone seen someone jump off the stage and attack someone, Shannon? No. Oh, okay. But one of the really interesting things about public speaking is that there's a freeze factor that is really important when I talk about fight, flight, and freeze. And that's the most common thing you see in public speaking, is where someone will suddenly freeze on stage, whether it be about performing, acting. But it's mainly talking in front of an audience that is really, really important. And that's what brings us to why we're scared in general. There are actually 3 scientific reasons why scientists have theorized about this. The first is that what's really interesting is that the US News and many researchers found out that public speaking is the #1 most scariest thing to people. That outranks really scary things as well, like clowns, spiders, which means that this is a really, really frightening topic to many different people. And that's why one of the largest things is first social science. Does anyone know as what Johanna means when we talk about when we want to fight someone or fly away or run away from someone when we're in danger? And why that somehow translates to debate and public speaking. The reason why that translates is because when we're in a dangerous situation, we naturally want to protect ourselves. And that also represents the other 2 theories, which is our thoughts and situations. One, thoughts is that we're usually scared or worried about doing public speaking because we really do have a mentality that we're not prepared enough, or that we are scared to do it because we're speaking in front of an audience. And the last part that this happens is in situations where raise your hand if anyone has ever had an embarrassing moment when they're in front of an audience or doing anything, there's a presentation or something like that. Yeah? Okay, that's great. Yeah, that's really, really common. But I'm sure that all of you also have times where you've had an embarrassing moment for public speaking. And that really does affect how we do, what we do when we have interactions and communication between different people, because we remember those type of things. Now I'd like to have a mini activity. Feel free to talk to the people around you for a little bit. The question here being is that now that we're talking about public speaking, we want to transition to debate specifically. So what is the difference between debating and arguing with your parents? You can talk amongst yourselves. All right, great. After your discussions, does anyone want to raise your hands or shout out the discussions that you had with other people? Carson?
No, wait, why me?
Oh, I was just trying to get people to talk. And I was wondering, do you have any descriptions of what arguing could be? Arguing?
Argue.
That's the description of arguing?
Okay, I really don't know.
Oh, that's fine. Does anyone have any descriptions of what they think debating or arguing is? Camden?
I thought that debating is kind of like organized arguing, and arguing is like talking with someone else, but you're trying to prove a point.
Last one more person. Elsa or Eunice, do any of you have an idea? Oh, sorry, Shannon.
Okay. Arguing is kind of like a heated discussion between some number of people. Yeah, I guess to kind of prove a point. But debating is, yeah, like Camden said, it's also organized and more of a refined way to
Yes, yeah, these are all really, really good descriptions and differences. And this is why I want to specifically talk about the differences in general. So, as Shannon was talking about, arguing generally gets into really, really angry and heated conversations. For example, if I argue with my dad whether or not I should be allowed to eat ice cream at dinner time, of course my dad is going to be really, really upset and go, of course not. You cannot eat ice cream during dinner time. But personally, I would say, of course I can eat ice cream during dinner. It's delicious. But when this type of arguing happens, right, are we really trying to persuade or convince other people? Because none of us will ever actually change our opinions, right? Because he will always think that I should not be able to eat ice cream during dinner, and I should definitely believe I should be able to eat ice cream during dinner. That means that we're not really trying to persuade or convince each other. We really just get upset at each other, and that doesn't really help our discussion. But what's really interesting about debate, and what I have described here, is that debate has a key medium person called a judge. Does anyone know what a judge is? In a court? What do you describe as a judge in a court, Carson? What does the judge do?
Whether the guy's guilty or not.
Yeah, that's a great example of how a judge decides decisions. But what's really interesting about a judge, and what is really interesting about debate in general, is that when we talk about debating, it means that we're not trying to convince the other person who has a completely different opinion than us, but rather we're trying to convince a judge who is a middle person who doesn't have any opinions on the topic. So let's say, again, my dad and I are arguing about whether or not I should be able to eat ice cream during dinner. A medium person or a fair person could be my mom. So instead of trying to convince my dad that I should be able to eat ice cream during dinner, I try to convince my mom that I should be able to eat ice cream during dinner, and my dad gives his own arguments on why I should not be able to eat ice cream. That judge or my mom then takes in our arguments and then decides whether or not I should be able to eat ice cream, which of course I can. And this type of a medium and balance with a judge in the center is why debate is so special and so important in our public speaking skills, because it teaches us to be, as Camden says, calm and collected, and being able to focus on persuasion and arguments rather than getting upset at each other. And that's what's really, really dangerous about just arguing in general and not having someone in the center to really decide whether or not these are good or bad arguments. Now I'd like to transition to the specificities of debate in general, and specifically the key words that we can learn about within debate. So the first thing, and you can shout out any of these things that you may or may not know. Does anyone know what a topic is? Or a resolution? Shannon?
What you're debating about?
Exactly. And this is one of the really, really important key terms in debate, and especially because there are multiple forms of debate, there are many different topics that we talk about. For example, one of the topics, as I just said, is that whether or not I should be able to eat ice cream at dinner time. And these topics are really important because it concentrates and allows us to know what are the specific things that we should talk about in a debate. Now, here are the two different sides in debate, which are affirmative and negative. You will hear these words a lot as I describe the different forms of debate that we do. So if I would say that I want to defend that ice cream is good to eat during dinner time, right? I would be the affirmative side, as the word affirmative means to agree with something. And so, as the example before, I agree that I should be able to eat ice cream during dinner. But the negative side is what my dad would be, which is that I should not be able to eat ice cream during dinner. And those are the key concepts of how debate works, because there are two different sides. And when two different sides disagree with each other on a certain issue, we create the affirmative side and the negative side. And that brings me on to the final point, which is events. And events is basically just another simple form to say different forms of debate. And as you'll find out soon enough, that there are many, many different forms of debate. And the point of talking about events is that you should know that there are many ways in which we can actually learn public speaking. Now, there are three main types of debate events that I want to focus on that happen throughout middle school and high school, which is what I want to introduce you to. Does anyone want to describe what they think of what happens in a general debate? What is the common example that we think about when we think of debate? Does anyone know?
Prove someone wrong?
Prove someone wrong? Exactly. But let's all think for a moment. If you think about someone debating, what do they look like? What do they dress as, and things like that?
Usually a suit.
Exactly, a suit and tie. Does anyone think of any other ways in which debater generally, we generally think of a debate? What do they use to write, or what do they use to how do they communicate?
They use a lot of open gestures, and they use notebooks and pens.
Exactly. And so that's why you see the photo right there. That is a common way in which we see how debate functions. And that brings me on to the first event, which is public forum. And this is the event that we all think about when we think of debate in general. It's the ones in which we wear suit and ties. We dress as best as we can. We brush our hair, wear deodorant, and we attempt to persuade a judge on many different issues, as we'll talk about in the other events. What's special about public forum, though, is that this is a two-person team event, which means that I would be partnered with, for example, me and Kiona against two other people. And what's really important about that cool dynamic is that when we talk about public speaking, it's not just about using your own skills to convince someone else, but also you have a partner and an ally that also helps you convince. So public forum uses monthly topics. And what that basically means is that every single month, the topic changes. And that's really interesting. There are many different issues in the world. So of course, it's really interesting to see how different issues formulate every month. Can anyone give me an example of an important issue that's happening this month? It doesn't have to be anything on the news, but just anything maybe in San Jose or in Mountain View or in Los Altos.
In Palo Alto, people are petitioning for 16-year-olds to be able to vote for school board people in the school board. Yeah.
Cool. And these type of months, the reason why monthly events are really important for public forum is that this allows us to engage in really, really recent news and events. And that's why public forum never really goes stale or boring, because it allows us to also constantly learn about new information. Public forum is focused on the act of persuasion, which is all about how we can convince people and talk fluently. As you'll see in the other two events, there isn't really much discussion on persuasion in and of itself, and this monthly topic allows us to learn a lot more. Now on to the second event, which is Lincoln Douglas. What does everyone think about when they hear the word Lincoln? Yes, Abraham Lincoln. And what was he? The President of the United States. Does anyone know who Douglas is, though? Douglas is a little bit less known. Douglas is known as Frederick Douglass, and during the 16th presidential election, Abraham Lincoln had a rival for the Republican nomination, and his name was Frederick Douglass. And what was really important about him is that he and Lincoln had the most famous debate that ever occurred before the Civil War, and that was known as the Lincoln-Douglas debates. And what became of that is the actual event itself, which is Lincoln-Douglas. And that's why it's really centered upon one-person debates. And instead of, as I'm talking about for public forum, instead of two people, it really is focused on your individual skill, your ability to talk by yourself and only rely on yourself when you're against an opponent. Unlike public forum, though, instead of using monthly topics, it uses 2-month topics. So it is really, really similar in that aspect, but it also has a lot more variety, and that allows you to research these topics a lot more frequently. For example, my dad actually just judged a Lincoln-Douglas topic this morning, and it was about whether or not high school students should still take the standardized testing, or the SAT, to get into college. And even though it's 2 months, there's a lot of research that comes into that, and that allows people to really engage in a focus on individual skill. The last event I want to talk about, and the one I'm personally biased about because this is the event I do, is policy debate. Just like public forum, it's a 2-person event. But what's different from all the rest of the events is that it's a yearly topic, and that changes everything in research in general. Can anyone give me an issue that they can think about that lasts for an entire year? Any big issue within politics, within something around our country, or something around maybe even our city? Johanna? Brexit? That is a really important issue. But does anyone, that's happening in the UK, but does anyone know an issue that's happening maybe right now in the United States or somewhere in our state? Kiona, do you know any issues that are happening? Foreign aid? Yes, foreign aid is a big issue, and that is actually one of the frequent topics for policy. But for example, the topic this year that we're learning about for policy is arms sales. And that grasping concept of such a large topic is what makes policy debate really, really interesting. Last year, the topic was immigration, and 2 years ago, the topic was education. And so, as I talked about in the specific topics of Lincoln-Douglas, where it's about SAT testing, or really small topics that you can change every single month, or every 2 months, policy debate focuses on yearly topics that allow us to actually really deeply engage within research. So unlike public forum that engages with persuasion, and Lincoln-Douglas that engages with solo debating, policy is really the topic that you focus on research, because you learn so much more about every individualized topic. Now that I talked about the debate events itself, I want to focus more on how you yourselves can engage within these specific events, and how you can even access them in middle school or high school. As I found out many of you are in 6th grade, 7th grade, and 4th graders getting into middle school itself, I really hope that you're able to actually learn and how to engage in the debate events. As I told in the beginning, I started in 6th grade, which meant that I actually learned about speech and debate in middle school because friends told me. And I go to a public-private school sector, which means that the ways in which I engage with debate is specifically through looking up and going to the clubs in my school. But the ones that I want to focus on today is the ones that Kiona actually does, which is in homeschool, because I know a lot of you are in homeschool as well, and that how you're able to access speech and debate even if you aren't actually at a school club.
Yeah. So actually, if you see the sticker, this is the name of my league. It's STOA. So it's for homeschool Christian debaters, and you can do speech or debate. So basically, it's just basically a league for people. There's a bunch of clubs around this area. So there's one, I believe, in San Jose. It's called Clash, and then there's another place called Response, which is in around Fremont Hayward area. And you can basically, like the website, I can give it to you later if you want to talk to me about it.
Yeah. So that's actually how we engage in speech and debate, both on a homeschool level and a school level. Right now, actually, after we talk about debate events in general, we would like to take a quick break.